So today we are here with Rachel Carpenter, who is the CEO of Intrinio. And Rachel started a fintech company, and I'm really excited to talk to Rachel today. I saw her speak at an event last year, and Rachel, your story really touched me. I'm getting familiar with the startup community, and the one thing that I have learned more than anything is that it's a community where when we share these type of stories, it's always could help, avoid some of the bumps and the bruises that most startup companies experience. So thank you for taking the time today and sharing some of your wisdom and some of your journey with the startup community. I want to just sort of jump in the conversation and ask if you would just tell us a little bit about Intrinio, what you do, and how you got here.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. This is always fun. I know we both work with startups on a regular basis. And so just like you said, right, you pay it forward. I'm happy to talk about failures and anything that went wrong, because I think people should be less ashamed of that stuff and talk about the lessons learned and kind of pass those on so other people don't make the same mistakes. So happy to dive into any of that today. But quick overview on my company, Intrinio. So we're in the financial data space. And what that means is things like stock prices, financial statement data, how much revenue is Tesla making, what does Facebook's expenses look like, all of those data points when you're looking at investing that you would need to get access to. And so we have a really unique approach. We've automated the process of sourcing all of those data sets. So you can imagine we go to places like the SEC or NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange, where all of the data originates, and we've automated the process of pulling in and cleaning up that data. And this is something that happens very much behind the scenes that nobody ever thinks about, right? Because if you go to yahoofinance.com, for example, and you look at the data, you just assume that it's there. But there's this whole world behind the scenes of sourcing those data feeds, cleaning those data feeds, piping them through, and you get used to just looking at it. And there's a whole world back there. And that's where we live day in and day out. And so our mission really is to unlock those data sets and then put them in the hands of innovators. So some people, when they look at investing, whether they're professional or retail investors, they just want to look at the data, right? Through a Bloomberg terminal or maybe a website like Yahoo. But for the people that are building with the data, right? They might be building an app like Robinhood, or they might be building their own trading algorithm or their own investment software. If you're building with the data, you really need developer and programmatic access to the data feeds. And that's what we specialize in. So we're kind of behind the scenes, and we're powering the data feeds to get them in the hands of the developers who are building the apps that everybody's used to using. So Robinhood is a client of ours, for example, which is a fintech company that most people are familiar with. And it's probably the best way to understand. When you're pulling up the app and looking, there's an API in the background that's plugging that data in that you're visualizing. And that's kind of really what our product is. So we're definitely helpers and supporters, and we just kind of unlock the flow of data. And what's really fun about being in this space, aside from the nerdy back end of all the data management, is that we get to see our data come alive inside of just incredible applications. Our customers are building next generation trading software, risk analytics, robo-advisory platforms, apps like Robinhood, AI investing bots, trading algorithms. I mean, it's kind of crazy. So we get to be in this unique place where we work with these companies when they're building and when they're innovating, and we get to see that. It's a really interesting view into fintech. So it's a fun space to be in.
Wow, right. And to your point, nobody really thinks about who's supporting the companies that are building these applications.
Yeah.
And especially in a space where today data is everything. I mean, if you're making decisions on something without the data, then your decisions are unreliable. So, It is, at the end of the day, it's all about, pulling it from the right resources. So that's really fascinating. Again, I didn't even think about it, in terms of, right, who is the one that's pulling that and giving it to the innovators that are building these things.
Yeah. And it's a tough business to be in terms of quality, right? Because if you're taking the data and then investing based off of it, right? Or you're investing your client's money with the data, or, multi-billion-dollar portfolio of assets that you're managing, or you're displaying it in an app that millions of people are going to look at. And if the data is wrong, it's really mission critical, right? And so it's an interesting space to be in terms of quality, because we have to stay very much on top of that.
And is this, in your experience, is this a space that's new and growing, or has it just been something that's there but nobody really appreciated that it's time to start to pull together?
The second piece, right? I mean, so you think about companies like Bloomberg and S&P, and there's a couple of really, really large data vendors that work in this space, and they do everything I just described to you very manually. So they've got teams of thousands and thousands and thousands of people overseas that are manually kind of plunking these data sets in and cleaning them. And so it's a really inefficient way to go about building data sets, right? And what shakes out of that is that not only is that really expensive to hire all those people to do that manually, and guess where those costs get passed down to the end user, right? Yeah, right. And then you have humans typing in data, which is prone to error, versus using machine learning and algorithms. And so and it also takes longer. So you're talking about a more expensive, slower access, like super high latency data with questionable quality, but it's attached to these big brand names that people are comfortable with, right? So it's kind of this industry where there's these giants who do have very robust products, but it's kind of time for the next generation of that, and to make it easier, make it faster, make it more affordable and more open. And so I don't think those guys are going anywhere. They have great products, but there's room to serve the innovators more and kind of have the next generation of data delivery.
Rachel, that's huge. And I think about it, I'm a lawyer. And so when I went to law school 20 years ago, when we were doing research, if a client had an issue and we were doing research, we would go to the library, open the books, read the cases, go back to the client, so that we would, and I think, unfortunately, lawyers get a bad rap because it was a very manual process getting the case information. And so there have been, in the past 20 years, there have been so much innovation in the sense that, individuals like you, they said, well, the information is there, the cases are in these books. How do we source that so that lawyers don't have to walk down to the library? They can go on their computer, and like you said, for us, making sure that the information is reliable could be the death of our career, because if we go in and argue a particular case and it was overturned, last year, then, you lose the case. So the consequences are huge for us in the lawyer space of when you talk about, that's how I think about it.
It's a great comparison. And what was it, the software, LexisNexis or there's a couple different, right? And so you make a great point, right? Because there's so many good examples. There's parallels here in so many different industries where it's mission critical. If it's wrong, you're screwed, right? And it better be high quality, but it's done in such an old school manual way that there's a lot of risks there. And so I look at law data, which is tough because of the way it's sourced at the source, right? And then also healthcare data. And then even right here, I know you're in Tampa, I'm in St. Petersburg. The city of St. Petersburg was part of this pilot program that we did for their own financials. So the city's financials, the municipality of St. Petersburg. And what's interesting is that, that's basically for muni bond investors look at that data, or ratings agencies. But guess how it's filed? On a 300-page piece of paper, right? Like PDFs. And so it can take those analysts over 6 months to get access to the muni financials. And what happens then is this ripple effect. If they can't find the data, or it takes a really long time. One of the most catastrophic things that can happen, and almost happened here in St. Pete, was they kept some data point about their cash reserves in a weird spot in their accounting. Like it was on page 285, and the ratings agency missed it because it's such a big document. They thought there was no cash in the city of St. Pete. And if anybody understands how this stuff works, right, they could massively downgrade the credit of the city. Then we wouldn't have our pier in St. Petersburg. We wouldn't have money for infrastructure. Nobody would be lending, or nobody would be buying these muni bonds and helping grow the city, and then taxes go up. I mean, it's like, so from government to healthcare to law to finance, it's kind of all the same story, right? Where if the data is filed in an outdated way, we have to get to the point of data lakes and structured and open data. And it's crazy to think about the ripple effects, right? The type of analytics you could run if there was fast access to this type of data across all those industries. So it's a good point.
Yeah.
not
Yeah,
just finance.
yeah, no, and I definitely, as I heard you talking, I could 100% relate. And so, the challenge now for, I think, companies that are coming out and the legal community is sort of, making sure that whatever we're using, whatever app or whatever research is, that the company is solid enough and pooling, because that now there are companies that are smaller than LexisNexis and that are providing this information. There was a company called Ross that came out. I'm not sure if you heard of it, but it bust out into the legal scene, and it was what you're doing.
Yeah.
They had AI. I'm going to say it at a much more simpler level, so forgive me. But essentially, they were using AI. They were using Watson to pull the cases and the information, and then unfortunately, the Thomson Reuters, because they were the source, they had most of the information. All roads led right back to them.
Yeah.
But I was excited because for me, it wasn't. It was now we're getting. Yeah, a lawyer isn't sourcing it, isn't going directly, but the technology that they used was pulling information from all over the world, as opposed to us having sort of this narrow vision, like what you're explaining. It was in a document, a 340-page document, and same thing for us. It's like in a book, in a library, in the law school or wherever we go. So that's why I have a question. How, from a stress level standpoint, how does that feel to know that it's kind of sitting on you in terms of providing this information?
It's stressful. I mean, it's a big problem. And we're only barely scratching the surface of it, right? And so I think, and you've probably learned something similar, right? There's the art of staying focused on a narrow niche and not trying to boil the ocean is an important tactic for not getting completely overwhelmed and stressed out about all of it, right? Because I want to tackle muni bond data and law data and make it all easier. And that's like the heart of entrepreneurship, is to have that drive and that passion. And it can be really difficult to whittle it down. But if you do whittle it down and you start small and you scale from there, it's a smarter, better way to build your business and stay focused. And it also helps you, you break off a small chunk and you start there. It's part of this concept too of, the concept of like incremental growth and learning. Like I taught myself how to program back in the day. Don't do it anymore, but it got dangerous enough to kind of get things started. And if I would have thought to myself, oh, I've got to build our entire website, I never would have started, right? But I always think about like, well, just make a box appear and then turn it blue, and then draw a line for a header. And then tomorrow we'll scroll down a little bit. And then you just kind of incrementally get started like that. And I think that's the best way to tackle any problem, is to break it up into small pieces and just move and start, right? Yeah. But otherwise it is overwhelming to think, because it's a big problem. It's a big problem to tackle.
And so I want to take a step back if we could, and I'd love to, if you could share your journey. How did you get here? How did you get to, where you are, where, you're doing and providing this amazing service?
Yeah. So I'll try to chunk it out, because there's been so many turns throughout the entire thing, but it started in college. Honestly, I met my co-founder Joey when I was in college, and we were actually initially trying to build investment software. Skip to the end, we couldn't afford the data to put in the software, right? Okay. So just some foreshadowing there, but that was our original idea. And so there was this kind of like, ooh, maybe entrepreneurship could be a thing, and maybe we should do this. And I was like turning down job offers and kind of taking the plunge and deciding to move to Chicago. I actually slept on Joey's couch for a year. So there was that kind of, okay, we're going to do this moment where we wanted to build this app together. And he had a background in finance. He was a CPA. So we moved down to Chicago. And then there was this like rough year where we both taught ourselves how to program, and we were living off of his salary together. I was sleeping on the couch. It was rough, right? But we got this thing built, and this is like pre-Intrinio, really. This was a different business that we thought we were going to build, but we got our feet wet with it, and we kind of went through the grindstone, learned how to program, got dangerous enough, got the app built. And that was really tough, but I was fresh out of college and I was excited. And I think that's part of what rode me through, like, what was a really uncomfortable time. And that was the year where we had our first super, super deep dive, like depressing moment, which was when we realized we couldn't afford the data that we needed to plug in to power the investment app that we were building. We got quoted like $70,000, $80,000 a month from the large data vendors. And that's what really like pulling ourselves out of that hole was like a Herculean effort, right? Because you've just spent a year building something that you're passionate about, you think is a really good game-changing app, and you're stuck dead in the water. The analogy I always use is like we couldn't afford to put gas in the car. So we're just sitting there looking at the car in the driveway, unable to drive it. And so we could have given up, right? And that would have been the easiest thing to do, would have been to go back and take one of those job offers and start my 401k and get my healthcare and do the whole thing. And instead, and this really pivoted and changed my whole life, right? Instead, we said, well, let's solve the gas problem then, right? Maybe we've uncovered a bigger opportunity. And so there was this kind of pivotal moment where we decided to dive into researching that and figuring it out. And we were like, we can fix this. Like, we can, let's learn, let's dive in. And we spent almost a year really just researching the data industry and learning all about it and figuring out how we might tackle it in a new way. And so then the next chapter was kind of, okay, well, we were in Chicago at the time, it was very expensive. And what landed us down here in St. Petersburg in Florida was being sick of the snow, because we both grew up in Wisconsin, didn't want to deal with that anymore. And lower cost of living, which is not true anymore.
No.
Yeah, things have changed. But at the time it was a great kind of undervalued secret, like a secret gem that no one had discovered yet down here. So, weather, cost of living, and both of his family wanted to retire down here. My family was moving down here. So we had some support systems and people we knew. And so we ended up moving down here on a whim, not sure if we were going to stay. And we ended up falling in love with the area. I mean, you live here, you know how amazing it is.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's kind of how we landed down here. And then there were all of these rounds of kind of early fundraising. What was tough about data businesses relative to traditional tech or SaaS businesses is that it takes a long time to build your minimum viable product. If you're building software or services, you can roll out a product pretty quick. Data, when you're building a corpus of data, it takes years, right? And so not only were we dealing with investors in Florida who didn't understand tech at all, because they were older and they were used to restaurants and real estate, and tech wasn't really a Florida thing. So not only did we have that working against us, but to the extent that they understood tech, they thought of it as SaaS. And they're like, why aren't you generating revenue yet? Where's your product? And I'm like, this is data. It's not SaaS. So raising that early money when we really didn't have a full 100% corpus of data yet was one of the hardest things we've ever done. And we got lucky and found some angels that were from the financial industry. And as you had mentioned, right, pulled the book off the shelf back in the day. And so they really believed in us, and we got lucky in finding some early stage investors down here. So there was that kind of angel, Hail Mary, please give us money to buy our ramen noodles while we're getting the tech built stage, which was still a little fun, but like very nerve wracking, right? And then, there was a point in time where one of my angel investors wrote me a check, and if he didn't write me the check, I wouldn't be able to make payroll, right? Early days like that. And then we finally raised our first $1 million round, at which point our product was getting up there, getting solid and robust. We were hiring a couple of employees. And that was like the first time I could breathe. My co-founder and I got to stop living in the same apartment. We could afford to pay ourselves a decent salary. We kind of finally felt like we had a real business and we could take a breath for a second. And so that was a big moment for us. And then it was kind of scaled from there. We ended up eventually raising a $5 million Series A round, grew the team up to about 20 people, and just have been scaling since then. So lots of steps in the journey. And I know we have talked about this previously, right? The amount of ups and downs is just wild. Having the resiliency to get through those is important.
Yeah. And first of all, congratulations, because I think, and I was ignorant in this sense too. I think when people hear about companies such as yourself, you assume that it was not easy, but it was done quickly. Well,
overnight success.
It doesn't exist. And if it does, it's likely that the foundation is not solid. And then you complicate what you were saying is that the tech industry was still, new. And how do you convince someone that this is a good idea and to invest and that it's going to grow? And thankfully, that they believed in you. And, I when I heard it, I thought, of course, why not? That you need that stuff. So, but you're right. I think people need to be open and aware to what the need is out there and, hearing you. So, and I appreciate you sharing that, because that's the one thing that I think startup entrepreneurs need is the resilience, because there will be days where you say to yourself, I'm dead in the water. And I'm
Yeah.
sure I can't even imagine how many no's it takes sometimes to get a yes. You know how, and that's a hard part too, to hear, yeah, no, thank you. We'll keep going. So
that's why it's so important to have conviction in what you're doing, right? If you waver and you're like, I don't know if this, we're gonna go for it, you're not gonna make it through the no's, right? They'll convince you of what you're already thinking, and you'll quit, right? But having the conviction and really believing in what you're doing is the only way that you're gonna say, no, okay, you're wrong. Next, no, you're wrong, and just keep going through it. So that's why picking something that you're really passionate about, I think, is critical.
Wow. So what if you could do something over, if you could say, you know what, I wish I'd done this differently. If there's one thing that you could have done differently, if there is, what do you think that would be?
You know, and the cliche answer to this question is that we wouldn't be where we are right now if I had done things differently, right? And I am a huge believer in failure and learning from failures. Like, that's actually a core value at Intrinio. Wow. And like, for example, this month, I'm making my team all keep track of things that they've screwed up and failed at. And then in our next all hands meeting, everybody's going to tell everyone what they screwed up, what their failure was, and what they learned from it, most importantly, right? So it's a tough question for me because I love the failures. I'm like, yes, go experiment and try something. And the data that we get about why it didn't work is going to be so valuable, and we'll celebrate that, right? And so it's just a different way of looking at things. But I will say this, I grew up in the Midwest, right? And so I come from a very frugal kind of a background, which is, it can be very good. But I think when I raised my first $5 million Series A round, I was overjoyed and then like locked down on the money, right? When in reality, that's the time to really invest and spend and actually kind of do what you need to do to get to the next level. And so we went a little slow after our Series A round because I was hesitant to spend a lot of money. And I think that really actually was the time where we should have doubled down on things. And that's why it's so critical to have somebody with a financial background and a strategic financial background to help you think through timing and cash flow and expenses and projections. Because I have a background in finance, but I don't like the details, right? Like, I don't like living in the details. And so really thinking through the timing of when you're raising money and how you spend it. And it works both ways, right? On the flip side, if I wasn't this way, I guess that the flip side of this would be that we spend so much money that we don't have any runway, and we're scrambling to raise money and running out of cash all of the time, which can happen too. And I advise some startups that have experienced that. So it's managing the cash flow effectively, whether that means you've got it, so spend now so you can grow, or hold on, like pull back. You have to extend your runway out a little bit. Cash is king, right? And managing the cash flow. But I think what's interesting is most people think of that as, oh, don't spend too much money, extend your runway. I was more so like, now's the time, right? Like we really should have thought about what kind of leadership should we bring in? Should we bring in a big wig customer acquisition specialist or something like that, right? And so that was a really interesting thing for me to reflect on. So yeah, that's one thing I think I would have done a little differently.
Right. And, you know, as I hear you talk, I think to myself, man, there's no book, there's really no book of telling you, because what you're discussing, it's, that's what the CEO does is making these strategic decisions and getting the timing right, and it's just a lot of moving parts to make sure, because, most companies don't succeed after 5 years. And so you're slowly trying to get to that point. And as the person who everyone's looking to, like, okay, what do we do with the cash, the people? I mean, there's just a lot of decisions that are.
Yeah. Well, and also the external factors, because even right now we're in such an interesting time. You can manage your cash as effectively as you want to, but the economy, the venture capital landscape, all of that stuff, like, you can get really in trouble because of timing of external events, right? Like right now we're heading into, arguably in the next 12 to 18 months, things might be compressing and really heading downwards, which means there won't be as much capital available to you. And the investors that will be open to giving you their money aren't going to give you as good of a deal. Valuations are going to sink, multiples are going to sink, the economy is going to sink, right? So what if you're the startup who was managing their cash effectively, but happened to need to fundraise right when that was happening, right? So paying attention to those external factors, I mean, it's timely right now to be thinking about those kinds of things. You don't want to be the startup that's running out of cash right before COVID, right? Or right before the economy tanks. So it's some of it's in your control and some of it isn't. So
Right.
a little bit left up to timing and luck.
Right, which goes back to adding why entrepreneurship and startups is such a roller coaster of a ride, because you're dealing with so many external factors.
Yeah.
So if kind of looking back, or I'm more so looking forward, where do you see Intrinio in 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah, so we've innovated a lot in kind of two areas. First, just around the bundling and packaging of data. So everyone else who sells data either does these huge institutional subscriptions, or they do like a marketplace where you go shopping. And we kind of take like a middle approach of having like bronze, silver, and gold, like scalable data packages. And that's over 8 years how we've realized buyers like to buy data. And so we're going to be adding asset classes, right? So we started with equities and options. We're taking a really hard look at ESG data right now, environmental, social governance, which is very, very popular. We're also starting to look at international data, right? So you look down the road 5, 10 years, if you're innovating and building, this is where you come for your data, right? You can get started easy on a bronze package and scale up over time. And then basically we're kind of the underbelly, right? Powering all of this innovation across financial services, and all these apps are powered by our data behind the scenes. So that's kind of where we're heading. And for us, it's all about continuing to make life easier for developers, listening to them and building what they're asking for, and then just expanding internationally and expanding across asset classes to keep growing the types of intelligence that we can unlock.
Right. Wow, that's really exciting. And you are touching different industries. Like you're saying, there are people who like investors, and just so the information is multi-usable by whoever. But it all does come back to the data, which everybody, even the companies that as a law firm, not just the research that I explained, but for our clients who want to do things, to make decisions about people. We're in the people business, which can be very unpredictable, but for our clients, when we say to them, statistically, you have 50 employees and it's probably 10% likely you're going to get sued, within the first year. I mean, that's information lawyers didn't talk about before. It was just, it happened, and then our clients, but we're also trying to be very preventative and helping our clients understand that it's statistically you're going to get sued the more employees you have. So it's not an easy conversation to have, but
no, but it's so necessary. I mean, I think I mentioned how important having like a financial mind on your team is, but I advise a lot of startups, and I'm like, triple what you think you're going to spend on legal, right? Not like it's such a necessary thing. I was like, you're so excited about your product right now, and I so respect you for that, but you have no idea what could go wrong from contract law, employment law, setting up your LLC. I mean, like there are an unlimited amount of things that could go wrong. And if the chips fall, you want to have someone good on your side. So hats off to you. It's important work that startups definitely need.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. So how do we, if somebody, how do you recommend companies or your potential clients, how do they come to you? How would you say to them they can get in contact or learn more about what you guys do?
Yeah, the two best ways to do it are, we have live chat on our website, and I know all of the people that are doing the chat on my team, my sales customer success team. It's so open and they're on there ready to chat with you. So you can actually get to me that way too. Just tell them you want to talk to Rachel. So it's www.intrinio.com, INTRINIO. You can chat us there, and you can also find me on LinkedIn, Rachel Carpenter. I'm usually pretty good about connecting with people and staying in touch there. So
awesome. And I've heard you say a couple of times you advise startups. In what space do you do that?
So mostly in the fintech space, but I do have a couple of startups that I'm working with that are actually in kind of like retail and different places like that, because as you know, the challenges are similar with fundraising and basic things like that. So I work a lot with startups at the early stage, because as you mentioned, right, like you learn all the mistakes. I'm like, don't fundraise that way, like change your terms to be that, like you're way off over here, just like steering them gently based on the lessons and the mistakes that I've made in the early stage. So obviously I can be really helpful with fintech companies, startups, because that's my space, but there's a lot of lessons that apply to all startups that I help some early stage entrepreneurs with as well.
That's awesome. And thank you for what you do. As I told you, I've been helping a client with their startup, and it's literally, I'm looking for, okay, how do I have this question, like you mentioned, developers. I don't speak their language. And so they'll mention something, they'll say API and I'm Googling, so anyway, thank you for being a mentor to startups, and it's
Yeah, of
so
course.
needed and necessary. I also appreciate your time today, and telling us a little bit. I love to stay in touch, so I hope that we, our paths cross again where we can have this conversation. And I think I love the way you reframed it, and I want to leave, our viewers with, what you said is that failures are how you learn, and they help you get to where you need to go. And so I think reframing it that way, it's easier to embrace and swallow, when you do fall. So thank you. And we will meet again.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This was fun.